Great honor for me to be with you, and how nice to see las edades de globalización en español, de la globalización. Muy bien. I have my English language version here, but I haven't seen the Spanish version till this moment, so I'm really thrilled with so many wonderful colleagues in Spain and so much to talk about. It's a tremendous pleasure to be with you today. The idea of this book is to take the long view. And for me, it was an opportunity to take the longest view from the birth of humanity as modern human beings, probably about 200,000 years of our species history, up to the present, and with some ideas about the future. And the theme of the book is we've always been globalized. In other words, human beings have always been interacting at a global scale, at least that is since we reached the global scale. Modern humanity dispersed from Africa probably around 70,000 years ago in some waves of dispersal. Moved quickly, given that it was on foot largely all over the world. By 40,000 years, had inhabited from Spain to the Pacific to Oceania. And then we don't know exactly when the first migrations came to the Americas, but the dates keep getting pushed earlier and earlier. Normal thinking 15 to 20,000 years ago, but maybe even 10,000 years before that, coming over Beringia, what was then the landmass that connected Asia and the Americas before the rise of ocean levels at the end of the last ice age. During this period, even in the ancient prehistory, there's clearly a long distance movement of precious goods, for example, and artifacts and minerals and weapons and gems that are found in places where they were not made, and it obviously moved long distances. But I then use this long history to try to explain the change of this global interdependence over time. So starting with the Paleolithic, before humans settled down to agriculture, I look at the birth of the agricultural age, which started our human settlements, our first villages, roughly from 10,000 years ago to about 3,000 years ago. I regard the next phase of globalization as arriving with what was then the automobile of 3000 BC, the horse, which was a unique new part of human civilization, because the horse made not only long distance transport and trade feasible, but also large scale governance feasible. You couldn't have an empire if you could only walk or basically go by sail. So land-based empires depended on the domestication of the horse. And a fundamental point of human history is the horse had been driven to extinction in the Americas. So all the native populations of the Americas had no animal for traction, and certainly not for long distance transport, other than the exception of the llamas in the Andes mountains. Other than that, there was not the same possibility for long distance settlement, trade, and governance and animals of work in the Americas. This made a huge difference in how the old world and the new world diverged demographically and economically for thousands and thousands of years. Actually, the horse showed up again for the first time with Columbus's arrival in 1492. this time with conquistadors riding on horseback. The next phase that I look at is with the invention of the alphabet, which is a phenomenal invention. It enables authors like me to write our books, but it enabled civilization to reach new levels of thinking, science, insight. We know it from ancient Greece especially, but of course it's ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, Persia, Mesopotamia, all with the modern alphabet, which develops probably first in Phoenicia and then in Greece around 1000 BC. And this gives rise to the age of empire, land-based empires, the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great's empire, the Roman Empire. And so much of Western history is really from that foundational period. The next phase is Spain's phase, of course, with the ocean navigation of Portugal and Spain from the middle to the end of the 15th century, with the two completely transformative voyages of Columbus and Vasco da Gama, the one to the West Indies, the other to the East Indies. The whole world changed, and Spain became the first global empire in the 16th century, and global capitalism began in this period as well, because for the first time you had transoceanic enterprise that was starting, especially in the 17th century with the English and Dutch East Indies companies, and creating world-scale multinational enterprise, joint stock companies, and a global regime of tremendous violence as well, because these were slave-based multinational systems, the Cotton Empire and other plantation-based agriculture in this massive proto-capitalist system. Well, we know, and it's a complicated story, we know that Britain, for many reasons, ended up at the top of the heap, winning more power but making the decisive breakthrough in what was the next age of globalization, which was the age of steam. Because probably if we want to put our finger on the most consequential invention from perhaps 1 AD up until the 20th century, I would say it was the steam engine, which freed society from what has been called the organic limits. Until the steam engine, all the energy that we could muster is basically the food we could grow to feed human bodies and to feed animals, and whatever could be gathered from some wind in the sails or wind in the windmills and some water wheels. That was it. But with James Watt's steam engine at the end of the 18th century, suddenly the ability to multiply energy, therefore work, therefore military might, was unprecedented. And this created the first industrial society, which was Britain. Britain became the world empire of the 19th century. Like world empires before, Britain went out to fight everyone, conquer everyone, create regimes of British control throughout Africa, throughout Asia, and there were wannabe empires. Spain still had a little bit of an empire left, but Britain really conquered much of the world because of it being the first industrial power. And the world faced a divergence of economic conditions unprecedented in history. because until then, empires rose and fell. Some were more powerful, some were less powerful, but perhaps the gap between the richest and the poorest might have reached 3 or 4 or 5 to 1. But with industrialization, the gap could reach 100 to 1. And in military power, a decisive, unbridgeable gap between the mechanized industrial power of Britain with its ocean military vessels, its artillery, its machine guns, unstoppable, basically, until similar industrial powers rose in Europe, notably Germany at the end of the 19th century. Japan became an early industrializer, the early industrializer in Asia at the end of the 19th century. And of course, the United States, which after the US Civil War became an industrial powerhouse. When slavery was ended, modern industry developed, national scale transport of rail, national scale steel manufacturing, and then the invention of the internal combustion engine, like the steam engine, bringing us new ways to use energy, and then oil became, alongside coal, the next great propellant of industrialization. Well, we know this story, the industrial age, and I think the point that I would emphasize in our period is that Europe tore itself to shreds in two internal wars of such devastation and brutality, the two industrial wars, that ended European domination in the rest of the world, basically ended empire in most of the world, and opened up the possibility for the formerly colonized or dominated parts of the world to begin to catch up. So after World War II, the parts of the world that had been so far behind, China, India, other parts of Asia, Africa, Latin America, began economic development and industrialization, some places more successfully than others. Of course, East Asia found the magic elixir of how to propel investment and growth over a period of more than half a century. And that's why East Asia rivals the United States and rivals the European Union today as the third major hub of the world modern economy. We're terrified of that, by the way. You know, there's a fixation on China, but what's happened is completely normal, which is that they stopped being so poor and were able to advance in technology. And there's nothing terrifying about that at all, except if we come at it from the viewpoint of arrogance of Western civilization, saying, how dare they compete with us? But I don't think we should view it that way. Now, each of these ages was propelled by technological advances, by hardware and software. And definitely in our age, the decisive technological advance is the information revolution. And that's why I call this seventh age of globalization the digital age. It is the age in which zeros and ones of bits of information are reshaping our lives every moment, like they're doing right now. The fact that we can be together on Zoom pretty effortlessly and very pleasantly, but in every aspect of our lives and every aspect of the economy, the fact that machines can transmit, store, and manipulate data at scales that are unimaginable and at speeds and depth that rival human intelligence in many ways is, of course, the transformative reality of our time, much more than any of the politics of the day. This digital revolution is now I would put it about 90 years old. It started in the brain of Alan Turing, to a large extent, the brilliant uh, English mathematician who decoded the German code, the Enigma, created the Enigma machine, who thought up a world of universal computation. And of course, there's a pantheon of giant luminaries, John von Neumann and others, who invented the modern age of computation. And then the discovery or the invention, because it's part of each, of the transistor, and then the microprocessor, the integrated circuit, and then what became known as Moore's Law, the ability to create processing capacity of our machines that doubled in capacity roughly every 18 months and have been doing so since the mid-1960s. So we have in our hands, in our mobile phones, computers that are vastly more powerful than anything that NASA had during the US moonshot, for example, and we each have it in our phones. So this is our world today. It's marked by three decisive realities. One is a technological revolution that only accelerates, actually. And the fact that we have a vaccine against COVID in 1 year, where vaccines used to take 15 to 20 years minimum to develop, is an example of that acceleration. So one point is the technological acceleration. A second point is that all this economic growth has by now led to environmental catastrophe, because fossil fuel turned out to have a side effect. And that side effect is carbon dioxide emissions that warm the planet. Who knew? Certainly not James Watt, certainly not Daimler and Benz. But the scientists realized already more than a century ago that we were warming the planet by human activity. Our politicians have been the last to know because they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear, and it's too complicated for most of our governments. But we have an environmental catastrophe on our hands. Fortunately, finally, now we're beginning to face up to it. And the third point is that knowledge, capacity is, thank goodness, not in the hands of a small part of the world. It's not in the hands of the British Empire or the American Empire. It is worldwide increasingly. It should be worldwide. I'm one of the few Americans that likes China's advance because I think it's good for humanity. This is my feeling about history, which is that everyone should share prosperity, not our corner of the North Atlantic world, which was an accident for us in the end to have such a dominant role for 500 years. So I see a world of true multilateralism, environmentalism, and technological possibility as our hope. And I believe that the digital age can be an age of great hope. Of course, you can take each of these big challenges and turn them on their head and say rivalry between Asia and Europe will create the new conflict. You could say that these technologies will create cyber war, loss of privacy, psychological addiction, and many ills. You could say that in the end, the growth will create such an ecological catastrophe that we won't even survive it, or lots of people will not. The truth of the matter is that globalization remains a choice. It can go to the good, it can go to the ill. I think the way to the good is actually understandable. which is this idea of shared global responsibility and shared global prosperity and shared global environmentalism as the pillars of the world that we want. So the book ends with a plea that we understand enough of our history, we understand enough of our dangers to ourselves, of our propensities to hate and to denigrate the others, that we don't fall prey again to the usual trap of self-destruction, which has been so much part of human history. And we use the positive tools that we have to actually solve our problems. There you have it. That's the idea.
Okay.